In the heart of a bustling city, tucked away in an unassuming corner of a dimly lit, industrial building, a man worked quietly in his studio. His name was Elias Franklin, though few knew it. For years, Elias had been crafting pieces of art that spoke to both the past and the future, yet his work had gone unnoticed, dismissed by the art world that seemed to only recognize fame and fortune. His hands moved with purpose, blending shades of dark blues and fiery reds, the paints mixing to form shapes that seemed to bend time itself. It wasn't just art to him, it was a voice, a declaration, a battle cry. Elias wasn't the type to follow trends. He wasn't concerned with fame or recognition. His art was an extension of his soul, a reflection of his experiences as a black man living in a world that often overlooked him. But the art world, an elitist, high society circle, had little interest in works that did not fit neatly into the molds of contemporary trends or traditional styles. His canvases were layered with meanings that most didn't understand, each stroke infused with the struggles of his ancestors and the hopes of a future where race and identity didn't define one's value. Yet, despite the depth and richness of his work, it was lost on the gallery owners and critics who ruled the industry. One such gallery owner was Maxwell Hartley. Hartley ran one of the most prestigious galleries in the city, a grand, whitewashed space filled with glistening, mass-produced art that catered to the wealthy and elite. His clients were high-profile, celebrities, politicians, and the type of people who saw art as an investment, not a reflection of the world. To Hartley, art was business. It wasn't about messages or narratives. It was about value, monetary, of course. Hartley had built his empire on the backs of well-known artists who fit the mold of what the market demanded. Their works were neat, polished, and produced for the highest bidder. He prided himself on his eye for talent, though few knew the true source of his success was his ability to predict which artists would hit the mainstream. To Hartley, the art world was an extension of his brand, and his brand catered to only the most influential. Elias had known about Hartley's gallery. He had dreamed of showing his work there, his vibrant pieces adorning the walls of a space that could give them the exposure they deserved. But Elias had also known that Hartley's world wasn't made for him. He wasn't made for a black artist with abstract, culturally rich art that didn't follow any conventional rules. The art world was a strict, almost exclusionary place, and Elias felt like an outsider. Yet, despite knowing the odds were stacked against him, he couldn't shake the desire to prove himself. He couldn't let the silence of his art go on forever. His pieces were too important, too powerful to be ignored. And so, Elias attended one of Hartley's exclusive events. It was a grand affair, the kind of event that took place in the cavernous, marble-floored gallery, where champagne flowed freely and the guests were more interested in showing off their wealth than discussing the art hanging on the walls. The paintings, largely contemporary, some abstract, some minimalistic, served as little more than conversation pieces, objects to admire and claim ownership of. The buyers were there not for the art itself, but for the status that came with owning a piece from the most exclusive gallery in the city. Elias didn't belong in that world. He knew it. But he still came, hiding in plain sight, unnoticed by the guests who were all too absorbed in their own lives to take a moment to appreciate what truly mattered. It was at this event, surrounded by the rich and powerful, that Elias first heard Hartley speak about him. The gallery owner stood at the center of a crowd, an air of arrogance about him, confidently holding court as the guests sipped their drinks. "Well, I have to say, I've seen some strange works come through my doors in the last few months," Hartley said, his voice loud enough for Elias to hear from across the room. He was speaking to a group of art collectors, but his words carried like a spotlight. "There's this young man, Franklin, I believe his name is. He's got some weird obsession with mixing African heritage and futuristic aesthetics. It's bizarre, honestly. I've had a look at his stuff. It's not serious art, just a jumble of colors. People who are desperate to appear avant-garde can't see beyond the gimmick." Hartley chuckled, and a few of the guests around him laughed as well. The laughter was like a knife to Elias's chest. He had heard it before, the mockery of his work, of his identity, of his very existence in the art world. But hearing it from Hartley, the man who controlled the gate to so many careers, struck a different chord. Elias stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to step forward and shout. He wanted to confront Hartley, to reveal his true worth, to show the world the power of his art. But Elias wasn't the type to make a scene. Instead, he swallowed the insult and retreated into the shadows, determined to get closer, to understand what made Hartley tick. He would make his presence known, but not just yet. As the evening wore on, Elias's thoughts swirled with anger and a desire for retribution. The art world, Hartley's world, had long ignored artists like him. It had sidelined voices that mattered, placing them in boxes labeled other, pushing them to the margins while elevating the works of those who fit neatly into the mold of acceptable art. But Elias was done being invisible. The gallery owner had just made a critical mistake. He had underestimated Elias, and it would cost him dearly. Hartley's words echoed in Elias's mind long after the event had ended. But as he made his way back to his small, modest studio, he couldn't help but feel a sense of determination wash over him. It was time to turn the tables. It was time to show Hartley, and the entire world, that the art world had no idea what was about to hit it. Elias would not be dismissed. His art was not a gimmick. His culture, his history, his soul, these were not things to be mocked. They were power. The art world, in all its glossy arrogance, was about to face a new era. And Elias was ready to lead it. The evening's air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft clink of glasses, a sound that rang through the marble-floored gallery like the toll of a bell. The chandeliers overhead cast a soft golden glow, illuminating the works of art hanging on the pristine white walls. Guests in sleek suits and elegant dresses drifted between the paintings, their laughter more about status than any genuine appreciation for the pieces around them. It was the type of crowd that Hartley loved to entertain, wealthy, influential, and always eager to indulge in the luxury of owning something rare. Elias stood in the corner, watching. He blended in effortlessly, his dark clothing and quiet demeanor allowing him to slip into the background. He was just another face in the crowd, a shadow against the glittering lights. Yet, despite his inconspicuousness, every part of him felt alive with anticipation. He had come to observe, to learn, but also to gather the strength he would need to confront the very man who had mocked him, Maxwell Hartley. Elias's eyes followed Hartley as the gallery owner walked from group to group, a glass of champagne in hand, basking in the adoration of the rich patrons who hung on his every word. Hartley was a man who prided himself on his taste, his ability to pick out the next big artist. But as Elias had already discovered, Hartley's vision was narrow, shaped by exclusivity, privilege, and a lack of understanding about the true power of art. Elias could feel the tension mounting in his chest. He had always been told that the world of high art was one of gatekeeping, an elite club where entry depended on who you knew or how much money you had. But to be mocked by someone like Hartley, the very man who stood at the gate, cut deeper than Elias had anticipated. You see, Hartley's voice rang out clearly across the room, I've had a chance to see a lot of emerging artists. Some of them have potential, but others, well, others are just chasing after whatever will make them seem revolutionary. Take Franklin, for example. Hartley's voice was rich with mockery, and Elias stiffened as he recognized his name. He's an odd one. Works with African motifs, futurism, abstract chaos, and yet, somehow, no one's ever heard of him. Why? Because, let's face it, he's more interested in making a statement than creating anything people actually want to hang in their living rooms. His art is more like an attempt to throw culture and politics onto a canvas and hope it sticks. Hartley's laughter was sharp and full of disdain. It's the kind of work that makes you think, what was he trying to say? But the truth is, it's just a mess of colors with no real direction. Elias could feel the blood rushing to his face, his fists clenching at his sides. He wasn't just being criticized. Hartley was stripping away everything that mattered to him, reducing his life's work to a meaningless jumble. The years of struggles, of pouring his soul into each piece, dismissed as though they were worthless. A few of Hartley's guests chuckled in response, nodding their heads as though they were agreeing with the expert opinion of the gallery owner. They didn't understand. None of them did. They didn't see the depths of the history Elias poured into every stroke. They didn't understand the importance of telling stories that had long been silenced. And they certainly didn't care about the messages embedded in the patterns of his art. They were here for an investment, not for the raw emotion that made each piece come to life. Elias's eyes narrowed as he watched Hartley continue. The gallery owner's voice was almost smug now, reveling in the attention. I took one look at his work, and I couldn't help but laugh. Who's going to buy that? Nobody with any real taste. It's easy to see why no one snapped it up. Hartley's smile grew wider as his audience seemed to respond favorably to his dismissive tone. A bitter laugh bubbled up from Elias's chest, but he swallowed it down quickly, refusing to reveal himself. He was already the subject of ridicule. There was no reason to add fuel to the fire by confronting the man. Not yet. Elias took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He had never been one for confrontation, especially not in public. But there was a fire now, a determination that had been kindling within him ever since he had entered the gallery. His art was not just a reflection of himself, it was a statement that the world needed to hear. And he wouldn't let Hartley or anyone else reduce it to a joke. As Hartley's mocking comments continued, Elias thought of the countless hours he had spent in his studio, working late into the night, blending cultures, colors, and stories that had been passed down through generations. Every painting was a message, a call to recognize the struggles, the triumphs, and the beauty of a people who had long been marginalized. His works were more than just visual, they were a living, breathing expression of his identity. To hear them reduced to something meaningless, something that lacked worth, Elias couldn't let that go. But he knew he had to play this carefully. Elias wasn't just any unknown artist. He was a force, a storm in the making, and Hartley had no idea what was about to hit him. As the evening drew to a close, Elias remained in the background, silently watching the guests disperse, the mockery still echoing in his mind. He could have walked away then, left the gallery, and never looked back. But instead, he stayed. He stayed because he knew one thing for sure, Hartley would regret those words. In a world where wealth and influence dictated what was valuable, Elias had something that money couldn't buy, art that could change the world. The time for hiding was over. When the last guest had left and the gallery was empty, Elias approached the front desk, where Hartley stood, still riding the high of the evening's success. He was counting his money, securing his position as the king of this exclusive world, utterly unaware of the storm that was about to unravel. Elias's footsteps echoed through the empty space as he moved toward the gallery owner, his presence unmistakable. Hartley didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in his own self-congratulations. But when Elias spoke, his voice calm but full of conviction, the gallery owner froze. "Mr. Hartley," Elias said, his voice clear. "I think you've made a mistake." Hartley turned to face him, his expression one of polite confusion, but then his eyes narrowed as he took in the artist's features. There was something about Elias, something familiar, though Hartley couldn't place it. "What do you mean, my friend?" Hartley said, attempting to recover his usual charming demeanor. "I've already told you what I think of your work. It's not my taste." Elias smiled, but it was a smile full of purpose. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Hartley. You don't know my work. You don't know me. But you will." The gallery's dim lights cast long shadows across the room as the last of the guests trickled out into the cool night. The clink of glasses and the soft murmur of conversation had faded into an unsettling silence. Hartley was alone, his thoughts already drifting to the next big sale, the next big name he could add to his collection. He never noticed Elias standing there, watching him with quiet intensity. Elias had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment, the exact moment when the smug confidence Hartley exuded would be stripped bare. He had been dismissed, mocked, and reduced to nothing. But what Hartley didn't know, what no one in that gallery had known, was that Elias Franklin was not just another struggling artist. He was about to reveal a truth that would shatter everything Hartley thought he knew about art, power, and the world itself. The gallery owner stood at the desk, running his fingers through the papers, calculating his evening's profits. The smug smile on his face made Elias's blood simmer with the memory of the cruel words he had overheard. But now, it was his turn to make Hartley listen. Elias stepped forward, his presence growing impossible to ignore. His black leather shoes clicked softly on the marble floor, each step an echo of the storm that was building inside him. Hartley, distracted and half-absorbed in his work, finally glanced up, his eyes flicking from the papers to the person standing in front of him. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Elias spoke, his voice calm, cool, and unwavering. "Mr. Hartley," he said, his words like ice, sharp and deliberate. "I don't think you fully understand who you've been speaking about." Hartley's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing as he took in the serious tone of Elias's voice. "What do you mean?" he asked, clearly irritated but trying to maintain his cool. "You've been mocking someone whose work you clearly don't appreciate," Elias continued, stepping closer to the desk. "But what you don't know is that the artist you've belittled, well, that artist is me." For a moment, Hartley's face showed nothing but confusion. He blinked, his lips parting as if he was about to say something dismissive. But then, something flickered in his eyes. A slow realization crept into his expression, as though he were beginning to put two and two together. Elias watched him carefully. The surprise was obvious, and it was exactly what he had hoped for. Hartley was stunned, his mind trying to process what was happening. He had mocked Elias, assuming him to be some insignificant, struggling artist, a nobody who would never make it. He had never considered the possibility that the artist he dismissed so casually could be the very person standing before him. "Wait," Hartley began, trying to regain his composure, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're Franklin? The artist I—" "The very same," Elias replied, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet power that Hartley hadn't anticipated. "And I'm not here to argue about my art. I'm here because you need to understand something." Hartley stood frozen, his face pale as the truth started to dawn on him. He had insulted Elias without knowing who he was, and now he had no idea what to expect. Elias continued, his tone growing more commanding. "You've been laughing at my work, dismissing me as some unimportant, unknown artist. But what you don't know is that my art is worth more than everything you've ever sold combined." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at Hartley's feet. The gallery owner's mouth went dry. He had no idea what Elias was talking about, but the confidence in the artist's voice, and the certainty in his eyes, was undeniable. Elias took a step closer, his posture now exuding authority. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a force. "I'm not just an artist. I'm a buyer. A collector. And I've been quietly purchasing works from the very galleries you've used to build your empire." Hartley's eyes widened. "What? You've been buying art from my competitors?" His voice was incredulous, as if the idea of Elias's involvement in the market was a direct challenge to everything he thought he knew. "No," Elias replied coolly. "I've been buying your pieces. The ones you thought were worthless. The ones you've dismissed. You've sold them to me, without even knowing who I am." Hartley took a step back, his head spinning as he processed the implications. He had built his career on knowing which works would sell for the highest prices. He was used to dictating the value of art, controlling the flow of wealth through the galleries. And yet, here was Elias, an artist he had belittled, telling him that he had been buying back the very works Hartley had deemed unworthy. "Impossible," Hartley muttered under his breath, as if trying to convince himself that this couldn't be true. "You're not." "I am," Elias interjected, his voice growing firmer. "You see, Mr. Hartley, you're not the only one who knows the value of art. I've studied this market. I understand it better than you. And the works you so casually dismissed? They're worth millions." Hartley's expression shifted from confusion to panic. The weight of Elias's words was beginning to sink in. The gallery owner's empire, the carefully constructed world of high art, was built on assumptions, on a hierarchy that he had created, a hierarchy that excluded voices like Elias's. Now, Elias was standing here, calmly dismantling everything Hartley had believed. Elias smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "You see, Mr. Hartley, your ignorance has cost you. You've mocked me in front of your guests, belittled my work, but what you didn't know is that I've been quietly acquiring art from your gallery. And now I hold the keys to your future." Hartley's face turned pale as he began to realize the full extent of what Elias was saying. The artist, the one he had ridiculed as nothing more than a dreamer, had the power to reshape the very industry that had given him so much success. It wasn't just about art anymore, it was about control, influence, and a complete shift in power. "What are you saying?" Hartley's voice wavered, his confidence faltering. You want to buy me out? Is that it?" Elias's eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. "No. What I want, Mr. Hartley, is something much more profound. I want you to understand the true value of art. I want you to recognize that what you call worthless is often the very thing that holds the most power." Elias took one last step forward, now standing directly in front of Hartley. The gallery owner could feel the weight of the artist's words pressing down on him, the realization that he had underestimated someone far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. "I'm going to reshape this industry," Elias said, his voice low and commanding. "And you, Mr. Hartley, will either be a part of that transformation, or you'll be left behind." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Hartley stood frozen, his mind racing to comprehend the implications of Elias's words. He had mocked the wrong man. And now, he would pay the price for it. The weight of silence hung heavy in the gallery, a stark contrast to the bustling energy from earlier in the evening. Elias stood there, his gaze unwavering as Hartley shifted uncomfortably behind the desk. The gallery owner, usually so poised and confident, now seemed fragile, vulnerable, like a man suddenly faced with the reality that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling before him. Elias, for his part, felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The fire that had burned inside him earlier, the anger, the frustration, it was gone now. This was not about revenge or retribution. It was about taking control of a system that had marginalized him and artists like him for far too long. It was about showing Hartley, and the world, that art wasn't just about what was deemed marketable by the wealthy elite. It was about culture, history, and identity. It was about power. "You know," Elias began, his voice measured and composed, "you're not the first to underestimate me. I've been dismissed by others before, art critics, gallery owners, even some of my own peers. But I've learned something over the years. When people like you underestimate me, when you mock my work, you only make it stronger. My art will speak for itself, regardless of whether you see its worth." Hartley opened his mouth to protest, but Elias raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "Save it. I'm not here to listen to excuses or pleas for forgiveness. What's done is done. What matters now is where we go from here." The realization that Hartley had no control over the situation became more apparent with every passing second. His wealth, his connections, his influence in the art world, none of it mattered now. Elias had come into this battle with an understanding of something Hartley had missed. He didn't just know art. He understood the game. "I've been quietly acquiring works from your gallery, Mr. Hartley," Elias continued, leaning forward slightly. "I purchased pieces from your collection, pieces you considered nothing more than lowbrow, unmarketable. And now, I'm in a position to do something about it. I'm the one holding the cards. I have the influence. And if you think you can just walk away from this without consequences, you're mistaken." Hartley blinked rapidly, his mind working furiously to come up with a counter-argument. But there was nothing he could say. Elias was right. He had underestimated him, and now, the very works he had sold with disdain were about to become the key to Elias's takeover. "Do you know what you've really been doing, Hartley?" Elias asked, his voice dark with conviction. You've been part of a system that's commodified art. You've stripped it of its soul, turned it into something to be bought and sold like a luxury item. But you're wrong. Art is more than that. It's a reflection of identity, of struggle, of culture. It's the story of the people who make it, not just the people who buy it. Hartley was speechless. The words hit harder than any physical blow could. He had prided himself on his ability to separate art from its emotional core, to place a price tag on something that was meant to be free, expressive, and uncontainable. But now, Elias was showing him that the very art he had disregarded was worth more than he had ever imagined. Elias straightened up, his posture regal and commanding. I've spent years developing my collection, quietly acquiring works that represent the truth of what art is meant to be. And now, I'm going public. I'm going to exhibit these pieces at the world's most prestigious galleries, pieces you sold off as if they were nothing. And I'll make sure the world knows that you were the one who dismissed them. Hartley's face drained of color. The idea of Elias displaying the very works he had ridiculed in the most coveted art spaces sent a wave of panic crashing over him. The thought of his empire falling apart, of losing control of the art market that he had worked so hard to build, was more than he could bear. No, you can't, Hartley stammered, his voice shaking. You're just one artist. You can't. Elias smiled, the edge of satisfaction clear in his expression. I'm not just one artist, Mr. Hartley. I'm an entire movement. A movement that will reshape the way art is seen, appreciated, and valued. It's a movement that's already started, and you're not going to stop it. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Hartley standing behind his desk, still frozen in shock. As Elias reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder one last time. Consider this a lesson in humility, Elias said, his voice smooth and unwavering. In the world of art, power isn't always in the hands of those who have the most money. It's in the hands of those who have the courage to tell their story. With that, Elias stepped out into the night, leaving Hartley alone in the gallery that had once been his kingdom. As the door clicked shut behind him, the weight of what had just happened began to settle over the gallery owner. His empire had been shaken. His confidence shattered. And Elias Franklin, the artist he had mocked, was the one holding the key to the future of the art world. The shift in power. Elias walked into the cool night air, his heart racing with anticipation. He knew that this was just the beginning. Hartley's empire was built on manipulation, on using art as a tool for profit. Elias had seen through that. Now, he was in control, and he had the power to change everything. As he made his way through the city streets, his mind raced with possibilities. The upcoming exhibitions, the artists he would elevate, the stories he would share with the world, he wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a curator of culture, a champion of those who had been overlooked. And he would make sure the world understood that. Elias had come into this game as an outsider. But now, he was taking the reins. In the weeks following his confrontation with Hartley, Elias Franklin's name began to echo through the art world. What had started as a quiet rebellion against a smug gallery owner had turned into something much bigger. Elias wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a force to be reckoned with. The first wave of change was subtle. Elias hosted private viewings, intimate gatherings where he showcased works from his collection, art pieces that had once been dismissed by the industry's elite. These weren't just paintings or sculptures, they were symbols of defiance, of identity, and of art's true purpose. The guests at these viewings were handpicked, artists, collectors, critics, and even a few prominent curators who had long turned their backs on artists like Elias. The response was overwhelming. Critics who had once ridiculed his work now found themselves marveling at the depth and emotional resonance of his pieces. Collectors who had ignored his pieces for years began to scramble for a chance to purchase them, realizing too late that they had missed out on something extraordinary. The art world, which had always been a world of exclusivity and privilege, suddenly found itself on the brink of a revolution. But Elias didn't stop there. He knew that to truly change the system, he had to challenge it from within. He reached out to the very institutions that had once rejected him, the prestigious galleries, the exclusive auction houses, and offered them a deal. His collection, his movement, wasn't just about selling art, it was about shifting the narrative. It was about showing the world that art wasn't just a commodity for the wealthy elite, it was a platform for voices that had long been silenced. And so, Elias began to host exhibitions in the very galleries that had once shunned him. His first exhibition was a daring move, a showcase of works that were deeply personal, steeped in history, and unapologetically political. Pieces that explored the complexity of Black identity, the struggle for justice, and the resilience of the human spirit. The response was nothing short of explosive. Revolutionary, one critic wrote, the word reverberating through social media like wildfire. A new chapter in the art world is being written, and Elias Franklin is its author. The gallery itself became a battleground. While some of Hartley's loyal patrons continued to show up, the buzz around Elias's exhibition quickly drowned out the whispers of those who had once clung to the old ways. People from all walks of life, from artists to art lovers, flocked to see the collection. They lined up outside the gallery, eager to witness the transformation of the art world firsthand. The media, too, took notice. Interviews with Elias appeared in major publications, from arts magazines to national newspapers. Journalists, once hesitant to touch his work, now clamored for a piece of the story. He was no longer just an artist, he was the catalyst for a movement. A movement that promised to change the very fabric of the art world. But not everyone was thrilled about Elias's rise. Hartley, still reeling from the confrontation weeks earlier, watched as his influence evaporated. He had tried to hold on to the remnants of his empire by securing deals with the same wealthy collectors and curators who had once filled his gallery with art. But they were no longer interested in the stale, overhyped works that Hartley pushed. They had been seduced by Elias's vision, by the idea that art could be more than just an investment, more than just a transaction. The more Hartley tried to maintain control, the more he realized that his power had waned. His gallery, once a cornerstone of the art world, now stood in the shadow of Elias Franklin's rising influence. One night, as Elias's exhibition opened at another high-profile gallery, Hartley found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at the empty walls that once boasted paintings he had sold for millions. He had no vision, no passion. He had only a reputation built on lies and manipulation. In the weeks that followed, Hartley's gallery saw fewer visitors. The auctions he hosted grew quieter, the bids lower. His attempts to secure new talent fell flat, as artists and collectors alike chose to align themselves with Elias. The power that Hartley had once held, like the pieces of art he had commodified, slipped through his fingers. Elias, on the other hand, continued to build. His exhibitions became the talk of the art world. His works were featured in the most prestigious galleries and sold at auctions for staggering amounts. But it wasn't the money that drove him, it was the message. Each sale, each exhibition, was a step toward creating a new standard for art, one that valued authenticity, diversity, and culture over profit. But Elias knew that real change wasn't just about personal success. It was about opening doors for other artists who had been overlooked, who had been cast aside by an industry that valued the status quo over true expression. With each new exhibition, Elias showcased not just his own works, but those of artists who had been marginalized, young, emerging artists from all over the world. He used his platform to elevate voices that had long been silenced, giving them the recognition they deserved. It was a community, a movement of artists who shared a common vision of art as a means of social change. The art world, it seemed, was finally listening. The art world divided. But with Elias's rise, the divide between the old guard and the new was growing ever clearer. Longtime collectors and critics who had built their careers on the backs of the art world's exclusivity were beginning to rally against the changes Elias was bringing. They called his exhibitions political and unpredictable, accusing him of undermining the sanctity of art as an investment vehicle. Yet, every attempt to discredit Elias only fueled his movement. The more they criticized him, the more artists, curators, and collectors flocked to his side. The narrative of art as something that could only be appreciated by the elite was slowly falling apart. Hartley, meanwhile, clung to the remnants of his former glory. He attempted to host his own exhibitions in a desperate bid for relevance, but the art world had moved on. His galleries stood empty. His auctions were filled with artwork that no one wanted to buy. And as the tide of change swept through, Hartley found himself powerless against the storm that Elias had created. In a final, desperate attempt to reclaim his place in the art world, Hartley contacted some of the world's wealthiest buyers, offering them exclusive access to the pieces he still held in his gallery. But by then, Elias's name was on everyone's lips. The wealthy collectors no longer cared for Hartley's art. They had already pledged their loyalty to the artist who had turned the art world upside down. Elias Franklin's exhibitions were now the standard by which all others were measured. Galleries that had once shunned him clamored for his presence. Auction houses that had refused to even consider his pieces were now offering him their prime spaces. His work, once dismissed as niche, was now being displayed in the most prestigious venues, hailed by critics, curators, and collectors alike as the future of the art world. For Elias, the victory wasn't just in the accolades or the sales. It was in the shifting tide. The art world was changing, and he was at the center of it all. But he knew that with power came responsibility. His success wasn't just for his own benefit, it was for the entire community of artists who had been left behind by the established elites. Elias had become the beacon of hope for the marginalized, a champion of those who had no voice in the industry. At his latest exhibition in London, the turnout was staggering. The gallery was packed with people from all corners of the art world, collectors eager to buy, artists hoping to be discovered, and critics who had once written him off now scrambling to write glowing reviews. The walls of the gallery were adorned with pieces that told stories of struggle, triumph, identity, and resilience. The people who had come to witness Elias's latest showcase weren't just admiring art, they were witnessing a revolution. Elias stood at the center of the gallery, watching as the crowd moved through the exhibition with wide eyes and eager smiles. He was no longer the underdog. He was the leader of a movement that was making waves across the globe. This is more than just art, Elias thought to himself. This is history in the making. As the night wore on, an older gentleman approached Elias. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his demeanor exuded the kind of wealth and power that came with years of dominance in the art world. "Mr. Franklin," the man said, extending his hand. "I must admit, when I first heard about your exhibitions, I wasn't convinced. But tonight, I see that I was wrong. Your work isn't just a statement, it's a movement. I'd like to discuss how we can work together in the future."